He thought it was just a joke. A little kid in worn-out sneakers, carrying his mom's cleaning tote, invited to play chess in front of billionaires for a few laughs. But 5 moves in, the room fell silent. Because what the CEO didn't know was that this boy once stood across the board from a grandmaster, and won. The snow hadn't stuck yet, but the chill in the Colorado air curled around the Alara Summit Lodge like it had plans. Inside, the fire crackled in a fireplace, big enough to walk into, flames licking the stone like dancers in tailored silk. Crystal glasses clinked, expensive leather shoes creaked against polished wood, and near the front entrance, the company's signature blue banner hung like a declaration of dominance. Alara Innovations Strategy in Motion. Robert Langford, CEO and chess obsessive, stood near the bar in a navy blazer with monogrammed cuffs. His laugh was loud, the kind that made people turn even when they didn't want to. This was his empire, his weekend, a curated retreat for executives, investors, and thought leaders flown in to mingle, flex, and pretend they liked each other while comparing equity stakes. Staff moved quietly along the edges, caterers, bartenders, a housekeeping team dressed in sharp black and white. One of them was Angela Morris, 44, composed, exact, head maid for the weekend. She didn't miss a detail, didn't waste a step, but today she wasn't alone. Her son, Elijah, 13, trailed just behind her with his hood up, a thin paperback tucked under one arm, and his mother's tote bag in the other. He wasn't supposed to be there, but the sitter cancelled last minute, and rent was due. Elijah knew not to speak unless spoken to. Angela had trained him like she trained linens, sharp corners, no fraying. Nobody noticed him at first. Not in this room of wine-swirling brilliance. Not with VPs debating mergers and crypto trends. Elijah sat on a bench near the kitchen entrance, thumbing through a book on endgames, and sketching a chessboard onto the back of a catering receipt. Just lines and notations, moves and counters. Angela moved through the room with grace built from necessity. She poured drinks, adjusted napkins, vanished dishes before they cooled. The kind of work that's only noticed when it's not done. But Langford's eye caught something as he reached for a cigar. The boy, he raised an eyebrow. Angela, he called out, his tone half mocking, half curious. Is that your son? She paused mid-pour, stiffened, and nodded. Yes, sir. Just for today. Langford smirked. Hope he doesn't charge by the hour like our consultants. A few executives chuckled. Angela forced a polite smile. Elijah didn't look up. Langford turned away, already bored, already re-engaged in a conversation about market pivots. But Elijah kept drawing, calm, steady, pieces sliding in his mind. No one knew what was coming. Not yet. But the board was already set. The kitchen was the only place in the lodge where no one pretended. No polished charm, no networking smiles. Just steam from industrial dishwashers, and the low rhythm of knives against cutting boards. Angela moved between counters with fluid focus, wiping surfaces and stacking wine glasses like sculpture. Elijah sat on an upturned crate near the back exit, legs folded under him, a battered notebook resting on his knees. The cover was worn smooth, corners bent from years of being opened, closed, studied. Inside, pages of scribbled grids, diagrams, equations, and chessboards mid-match. Some marked with notations. Some finished with the word mate circled 3 times. He wasn't playing pretend. He was solving. A kitchen timer buzzed. A server shouted for more hors d'oeuvres. Elijah didn't flinch, pencil tapping once, twice, before sketching out a bishop sacrifice that would clear a path to promotion. He wasn't listening for praise. He wasn't expecting to be seen. Angela's supervisor noticed anyway. Angela Meredith snapped. Arms folded, voice clipped with performative control. You were told staff can't bring family. Angela kept her tone level. He's not in the guest areas. He's quiet. I didn't have a choice today. Meredith's eyes flicked to the boy. Quiet now. Until he's not. Angela's lips pressed into a line. He won't be a problem. He already is, Meredith hissed, then pivoted and left, heels clicking like punctuation. Elijah didn't look up, but his pencil paused just long enough for the silence to sting. Angela exhaled through her nose and knelt beside him. Keep to yourself, baby, she whispered, and stay out of sight. Elijah nodded once, eyes on the page. I'm not trying to mess anything up. You're not, she said, brushing a stray curl from his forehead. They just don't know what they're looking at. By late afternoon, The mood had shifted in the main room. Suits loosened, voices louder. The wine poured easier. Langford swaggered through the hallway, with a glass of something dark and old in his hand. His laugh ricocheted off the stone walls like it paid rent there. He turned the corner, and caught a glimpse through the kitchen door. A boy, curled up on a crate, head down, drawing. Langford tilted his head. "What's the kid doing?" he asked. "No one in particular." One of the junior managers peeked in. "Looks like chess or something." Langford squinted, smirked. "Cute." He tapped the glass against his ring and moved on, the joke already forming in his head. The kind of joke that gets a few polite laughs and one eye roll. Elijah erased a move, recalculated, sketched a new one. The room may not have seen him, but the board was watching. The cocktail hour buzzed like a well-oiled hive. Suits shimmered under pendant lights, laughter ricocheted off the high beams, and the smell of smoked rosemary cocktails clung to the air like expensive cologne. Someone had queued up a jazz playlist no one was really listening to. The executives of Alara Innovations stood in soft clusters, hands in pockets, drinks swirling, talking about the things they thought made them important. Market strategy, IPOs, acquisitions that hadn't made the press yet. Robert Langford held court near the fireplace, perched casually on the edge of a leather armchair like a lion watching his own reflection. Scotch in hand, pinky ring catching the light. "You know," he said with a half smile, "business isn't poker, it's chess. Poker's luck and bluff. Chess is power. Every piece, every move, deliberate." Someone nodded too fast. Another chimed in with "totally agree, it's about vision." Langford grinned. "Exactly. You see the whole board, you control the game. Doesn't matter what your opponent wants to do. If you're 5 moves ahead, you've already won before they blink." Polite chuckles circled the room. People sipped. One of the guests, a tech consultant from Chicago, gestured toward the far hallway. "Speaking of chess, isn't that the kid who's been sketching boards all day?" Langford turned. Through the open arch, Elijah sat cross-legged on the carpet near the kitchen, a book open across his knees, a pencil twirling between his fingers. The light from the sconces framed him like a quiet painting. Langford let out a low chuckle. "What's he reading? Chess for Dummies?" A few people laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was safer than silence. Angela was nowhere in sight. Langford took a sip and said louder than he needed to, "Hey, think the little man wants to play?" Heads turned. Elijah didn't. Langford raised his voice just enough to carry over the hum of the room. "Hey buddy, you ever try a real game? Or you just draw 'em?" The chatter slowed. Elijah looked up. His expression didn't change, just lifted his eyes from the page to the man holding court. Langford smiled, the way a man smiles when he thinks he's being generous. "Come on, we've got a board right here. Might as well make this retreat educational." One of the junior execs added, "Teach him how the big leagues do it." Elijah closed the book slowly, stood, and walked toward the board like it was a hallway he'd already memorized. He said nothing. Langford grinned wider. "Don't worry, kid. I'll go easy on you." Elijah looked at the board, then at Langford. His voice was soft, steady. "Please don't." The chessboard was carved mahogany, set into a stone pedestal like it belonged in a museum, not a living room. The pieces were hand-lathed, polished until they gleamed under the chandelier. A centerpiece, not a tool. Most weekends, it sat untouched, like decor that hinted at intelligence, without ever requiring it. But tonight, it had an audience. Langford stood beside it, swirling his scotch with one hand and gesturing toward the squares with the other. "All right, let's have some fun. Kid's been drawing lines all day. Let's see if he can follow one." Laughter trickled in. Not mean, exactly, just detached. The kind of laugh people give when they don't know what they're endorsing, but don't want to be the only one not smiling. Angela had just emerged from the hallway, with a tray of glassware, when she saw it. The crowd, the board, her son, Elijah, she called gently, trying to keep her voice even. "Come here, baby." Langford raised a hand. "No worries, Angela. We're just playing a friendly game. Team building, right?" He winked at a nearby VP. "Besides, boy might surprise us." Angela froze, tray hovering mid-air. Her eyes flicked to her son. Elijah looked at her, then at Langford, then at the board. Calm, still. "Okay," he said. "Just one word. No hesitation, no fear, not even a second glance." Angela's hand tightened around the tray. Langford laughed, clapping once like a talk show host introducing a segment. That's the spirit. Don't worry, I'll take it easy on you, champ. Elijah stepped forward and set his worn notebook down on a side table. He reached out to adjust the board, rotating it so the white pieces faced him. Langford raised an eyebrow. Bold move, kid. Elijah just sat down. The guests circled in. A VP leaned on the mantel. Someone else pulled out their phone. A few whispered jokes, waiting for the punchline to walk itself in. Angela didn't move. She couldn't. She watched from the hallway, one foot rooted to the tile, fingers trembling just enough for the tray to shift. Langford cracked his knuckles. Let's see what you've got. Elijah didn't reply. He placed his hands on his knees and stared at the board, unblinking. The room quieted, just slightly, enough for someone to notice it wasn't just a game anymore. Langford moved first. King's pawn. Classic, quick, confident, like flicking on a light switch. Elijah waited, 1 second, 2, then reached forward and slid his bishop's pawn out, slow and silent. Langford smirked again, but it didn't land, because Elijah wasn't smiling, and suddenly, nobody else was either. Langford played like he talked, loud, fast, and without leaving room for doubt. His second move came before Elijah's fingers even left the board. A knight snapping forward like a punchline he didn't wait to set up. Control the center, he said aloud, glancing at the crowd. Basic stuff. A few execs nodded, trying to look impressed. One of them nudged his colleague and whispered, "This is going to be brutal." Elijah said nothing. He sat still, back straight, eyes on the pieces like they were breathing. His hands didn't fidget. No nervous glances, no false starts, just quiet. His next move came slow, methodical. A knight tucked behind his pawns, unassuming. Defensive. Langford grinned. Kids being cautious. That's good, he said, dropping his bishop aggressively into play. Let's see how long he lasts. Laughter. Thin, polite. Angela stood at the edge of the room, barely breathing. Her hand clenched the hem of her apron so tight the fabric creased between her knuckles. Elijah adjusted in his seat. Then, another move. Quiet. Clean. A pawn sliding diagonally, forcing Langford's knight to retreat or risk trade. Langford blinked. Third move, Elijah's bishop glided out and held tension across the center of the board. His rook wasn't far behind. Unusual this early. Precise. Langford scratched the side of his head. The energy shifted. Just a fraction. Executives leaned in. Phones were lowered. Someone near the back tilted his head. By the fourth move, Langford's front line was tangled. One poorly placed pawn now blocked his bishop's exit. His knight was crammed into a corner, and Elijah's side, open, balanced, breathing. A VP, Alan Burke, head of product strategy, crossed his arms and whispered, "Wait, he's not guessing." Langford tried to smile. "Beginner's luck," he muttered, and moved his queen. Too soon, too far. Elijah didn't flinch, just pressed a pawn forward to bait it, clean as a scalpel. Langford paused. A different kind of silence started to spread, not the quiet of a polite crowd, but the quiet of people realizing they might be watching something they didn't understand. Angela's heart thudded in her chest. She'd seen this before, at the community center, when Elijah played grown men 3 at a time, when he beat Mr. Kavanaugh, the retired professor who once taught probability theory at Stanford, when he'd said, quietly, "You don't win by rushing." Langford leaned back slightly. "All right," he said with a forced chuckle. "Looks like I've got a real opponent." Elijah's eyes never left the board. He hadn't come to play pretend. He came to play. Langford's fingers hovered over the board longer now. What had started as swagger, fast hands and confident grins, was turning stiff, calculated. His queen was boxed in, his bishop stranded behind a wall of his own making. The rhythm was gone. He cleared his throat and moved a rook, then immediately looked unsure about it. Elijah didn't flinch. He just reached out and slid a pawn forward, trapping the rook in place like it had never belonged there. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't smug. He didn't glance at the crowd that had now doubled in size, standing behind velvet chairs and leaning on fireplace mantels, watching like they'd stumbled onto the start of something. Langford leaned back in his chair, exhaling through his nose. "He's quiet," he muttered. "That's unnerving." Someone near the back chuckled, low and careful. Alan Burke whispered to the man beside him, "This isn't his first game. Janice, from the legal team, tilted her head. Where'd a kid like that learn this? Elijah didn't look up. He moved his knight, forcing Langford's queen into a corner, then finally spoke. My coach was a grandmaster. The sentence landed like a dropped glass. Langford blinked. I'm sorry, what? My coach, Elijah repeated, still studying the board, before he moved to Oslo. A pause filled the room like rising water, the kind of pause that made people rethink every assumption they'd carried in. Angela, standing at the edge, stared at her son, her lips parted just slightly. He hadn't told her that part. Langford forced a laugh. What, like some YouTube guy calls himself that? Or, no, Elijah said quietly, finally meeting his eyes. FIDE certified. He used to play Kasparov in the 90s. Said I reminded him of him. When I play slow. Langford opened his mouth, then closed it. The room stayed silent. Langford looked down again, suddenly hyper-aware of every misstep, every aggressive opening that now looked foolish. His side of the board was crowded, suffocating. Elijah's was poised, each piece with purpose, like he'd arranged them before the game even started. This is ridiculous, Langford mumbled, nudging his bishop into motion. We're just having fun here. Elijah didn't respond. He moved his rook. Langford squinted. Wait. Hold on. You're pinned, Elijah said softly. Langford stared at the board. The move was clean. Not cruel, just undeniable. The audience didn't cheer. They just stared. Because they knew. This wasn't a fluke. This was a lesson. And Langford, he was the one being taught. Langford's palm hovered over his king like he could will it somewhere safer. The sweat at his temple glistened under the chandelier, catching the light in a way his Rolex didn't. His jaw clenched, then released. But his hands were starting to betray him. Too still, too shaky. Elijah's side of the board looked surgical, not crowded, not chaotic, just inevitable. The rook that cornered Langford's queen now pressed inward with quiet pressure. His own knight, trapped. His bishop, useless. The king, surrounded. Elijah reached forward, moved a pawn, then tilted his head slightly. You know, he said, voice calm, almost polite, this looks like the Kasparov, Carlsen trap. Langford blinked. What? Elijah didn't repeat it, just watched. Then casually, like he was naming a street he'd walked 100 times, he added, except that one ended faster. The room cracked with silence. Someone near the back, Jason, the fresh hire from NYU, pulled out his phone. His fingers moved fast. Yanis leaned over his shoulder. What are you doing? Just checking something. Langford didn't notice. His eyes darted across the board, fingers twitching toward his rook, then pulling back. This can't be right, he muttered. This isn't. Jason's voice cut the air. Holy guys, look at this. He turned the screen to show them. There it was. 12-year-old prodigy stuns chess world. Defeats grandmaster Raoul Gorski in New York exhibition. A photo. Elijah, younger, in a navy hoodie, shaking hands with a man whose expression looked almost exactly like Langford's right now. Confused, humbled, trying to figure out what just happened. More heads turned, more phones lit up. Langford's throat moved like he was swallowing broken glass. Angela pressed a hand over her mouth. Yanis stepped forward, whispering to no one in particular. He wasn't just coached by a grandmaster, he beat one. Langford looked up, finally seeing the weight behind the boy's silence. Q, he started, then stopped. Elijah's face didn't gloat, didn't smirk. He wasn't enjoying it. He was simply present, like this was just another match. Another problem to solve. I thought this was a joke, Langford muttered. I know, Elijah said. That's why it worked. Gasps didn't come in waves. They came in stillness, like the entire room had just realized they'd misread the board from the start. Langford sat back, suddenly very small in a room he'd designed to make him feel enormous. Across from him, Elijah rested his hands on his knees again, just as calm as when he started. The pieces had been speaking all along. Only now were people listening. Langford's queen trembled in his grip, not because she was trapped, though she was, but because he couldn't figure out where to put her, that wouldn't make things worse. Every square looked like a mistake waiting to happen. He hesitated too long, then dropped her onto a corner square like it might buy him time. It didn't. Elijah leaned forward. His fingers moved with precision. No hesitation, no noise. The rook slid across the board in a straight, decisive line, and landed behind Langford's exposed king. Check! The word was soft, barely above a whisper, but it carried through the room like thunder in a canyon. Someone gasped. Another murmured, "Oh my God." Langford froze. His rook was boxed in. His bishop had no angle. The queen, she was too far, off balance. And his king sat stranded in the open, like a man who thought he was surrounded by bodyguards, only to realize they'd already left the building. Angela stood just inside the kitchen doorway, half hidden behind a column. Her hand clutched the doorframe like she needed something solid to hold onto. Her eyes shimmered, but not from fear, from something deeper, older, a pride too vast to speak aloud. She'd watched Elijah grow up, folding strategy into everything. How he played, how he spoke, how he held back even when he could strike. He wasn't loud. He didn't need to be. He was one of those rare ones who moved quietly through the world, but saw every corner of it at once. Langford leaned in, as if seeing closer might change the outcome. He shook his head and reached for a pawn like it could somehow shield him. It couldn't. Elijah's eyes didn't leave the board. He wasn't watching Langford. He was watching the rhythm, the pattern, and the pattern said, collapse was near. Move. Langford muttered to himself. There has to be. There isn't. Someone whispered near the back. Janice covered her mouth. Langford sat back, one hand braced on the armrest. His face had gone a shade paler. You've got to be kidding me, he whispered, barely audible. But Elijah didn't reply. He wasn't there to mock him. He was there to play. Angela's breath caught in her throat. A single tear slipped down her cheek, but she wiped it away before it could fall far. No one noticed. Not really. They were too busy watching the boy they had called the Maid's kid dismantle their leader's strategy like it was nothing more than a flawed blueprint. Langford looked across the board and finally saw him. Not a kid, not a prop in a joke, but a player, and worse, for the first time in his life, not the one in control. Langford moved his knight. Desperate now, not strategic. It was a defensive twitch, like throwing a hand up in a storm, and hoping the wind might respect it. Elijah's eyes flicked across the board, tracking every angle, then landed where they needed to. Another pawn. One square forward. Clean, unemotional. Langford's breath hitched. He leaned in, eyes darting between his queen and the broken fortress around his king. He looked for an escape hatch that didn't exist. The room was still, like the air itself had pulled back to watch. Next move. Elijah's bishop sliced across the diagonal, like a scalpel. Tight, surgical. Now Langford had only one legal move left, and it didn't matter. His king was trapped, hunched behind his own fallen army. 3 moves ago, it had been a challenge. Now it was a formality. Langford reached for a rook, then paused, then set his hand back in his lap, like even the pieces were too heavy to carry anymore. Elijah moved one last time. Queen to e6. Checkmate. No one breathed. No one spoke. Even the fire in the hearth seemed to pause mid-crackle. Elijah didn't smile, didn't gloat, didn't look for approval. He simply stood, tucked in his chair with quiet care, and nodded once to Langford. Respectful, formal. Then he reached forward and began resetting the board, one piece at a time. White, then black, order from chaos. Langford sat motionless, one hand still resting near the square. His queen had abandoned. His face said it all. This wasn't just about losing a game. It was about being seen, for the first time, as someone who could lose. Angela hadn't moved. She stood in the doorway like stone, proud, still, flooded with something too big to hold. Her son hadn't just won. He had done it with grace, with silence, with the same dignity she carried into every room she cleaned. The guests stood frozen around the scene. Phones were off now, drinks untouched. The retreat, the ego, the illusion of hierarchy, all of it had been flipped upside down with 7 well-placed moves, and a boy who knew how to wait. Janice swallowed, barely a whisper. He reset the board. Alan nodded, because the lesson wasn't just about winning. Langford finally stood, slowly, like he'd just come out of anesthesia. He looked at Elijah, then at the pieces, then down at his own hands. No clever quip, no recovery, just silence. Elijah placed the last pawn gently in its square, then turned and walked back toward the kitchen hallway. No fanfare, no applause, just a quiet storm that had passed through and left the whole room changed. The murmurs didn't return right away, not even after Elijah disappeared down the hallway, his notebook under one arm, his steps as calm as they were when he entered. The guests stood scattered like pieces from a drop deck of cards, some still staring at the board, others frozen mid-sip, unsure how to recover from what they'd just witnessed. Langford remained near the hearth, his scotch untouched on the mantel. His hand hovered near it, but never lifted. Something in him had cracked, not from the loss, but from what it revealed. He had invited a child to the board as a joke, and the child had answered with a masterclass. Angela tried to slip away quietly, disappearing toward the dish cart near the back staircase, but she didn't make it far. "Excuse me, Angela." "Right." She turned. It was Janice, still holding her glass by the stem like she forgot it was there. "I just wanted to say." She paused. "Your son." That was beyond words. Angela gave a soft nod. "Thank you. He's been playing since he was 5. Chess kept him focused when life didn't." Another voice joined. Alan Burke stepped forward. "Has he ever applied to any academies, programs? I know someone at a STEM boarding school in DC. They've got a grant fund for gifted kids. I'd be happy to make an intro." Angela blinked. "No, no one's ever really looked at him that way." "They will now," Alan said. Then came another, a short woman in glasses from the operations team. "I owe you an apology," she said quietly. "Earlier, I made a comment. When I saw him sitting by the kitchen, I assumed." She caught herself, swallowing shame. Angela didn't scold. She didn't comfort either. She just nodded once. The moment held. And that was enough. Across the room, someone was Googling youth chess tournaments. A man from HR whispered, "We've been talking about mentorship programs for years. Why not start with someone already mentoring himself?" And just like that, the air shifted. Elijah wasn't the maid's son anymore. He was something else now. A symbol of control, of restraint, of quiet brilliance that didn't ask to be noticed, but couldn't be ignored. Langford finally moved. Just one step. He looked like a man walking through the echo of something he didn't fully understand. Angela watched him out of the corner of her eye, then turned away. She didn't need his recognition. Not after what the room had just learned. Respect, when earned without asking, makes a different kind of noise. It lingers. The kitchen was quieter now. The clatter of plates had faded. Most of the staff were upstairs prepping for the next day's checkouts. Angela wiped down a countertop in slow, practiced circles. Elijah sat at the far end, hunched over his notebook again. Not drawing a board this time, just shading in squares like it helped him think. The match was over. The guests had drifted back to their rooms, but the weight of what had happened still sat in the air like the scent of wood smoke and citrus polish. Something had shifted, and no one was pretending it hadn't. The door creaked. Angela turned, expecting a server or Meredith with another task, but it was Langford. No blazer, no drink, just him, hands in his pockets, face drawn, expression unreadable. Angela straightened but said nothing. He didn't speak right away, just looked at Elijah, still bent over the notebook, still quiet, still steady. Then Langford reached into his coat and pulled out a small folded envelope. He placed it gently on the counter between them like it was fragile. Angela raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" Langford cleared his throat. "Not an apology. I figured I owe more than that." Angela hesitated, then reached for it. Inside, a handwritten note, simple, neat handwriting. Langford surprisingly careful. "Elijah, you didn't just win a game. You changed how I think about the board, and maybe the people I've never looked at twice. That's rare. That matters. If you're ever ready to build something bigger than chess, we're hiring minds like yours. Respectfully, Robert Langford." Tucked behind the note was a sleek black contact card. Langford's direct line, personal email, and a handwritten number with a scribbled note. "Don't wait. When you're ready, we are." Angela stared at it for a long moment, then looked up. Langford's expression was different now. No smirk, no mask, just a man who'd been quietly stripped of his illusion of control, and maybe realized he was better for it. "He didn't do it to prove anything," Angela said softly. "That's just how he moves through the world." Langford nodded. "That's what makes it dangerous, and brilliant." He turned to leave. Mr. Langford, Angela said. He stopped. I hope this wasn't about Image. He looked back. It wasn't. Image doesn't beat me in 6 moves. Angela glanced at her son, still scribbling, still silent. Then she slid the note back into the envelope, tucked it into her apron, and said nothing more, because some victories don't need to be explained, and some invitations speak loudest in silence. Elijah didn't bring it up. Not once. Not when the servers gathered in the kitchen the next morning whispering about the match. Not when Alan Burke offered him a scholarship application with a quiet, "You ever think about MIT?" Not even when Angela asked, gently, "How'd you know it would work?" While folding linens in the guest wing hallway. He just shrugged. It wasn't about him. It was about the board, and that was the last he said about it. He didn't ask who'd seen the news article. He didn't show off the envelope Langford left. He didn't let anyone take a picture with him. Didn't brag. Didn't flinch when people stared a little longer at breakfast, or whispered his name behind half-lifted coffee cups. He just went back to his notebook, quietly, steadily, like the game had never been about recognition, only understanding. But the room remembered. Not just the guests, not just the executives and investors and product leads, who'd watched their CEO get cornered by a boy in worn sneakers. The staff remembered. The barista who'd poured wine for half those men without ever hearing a thank you. The young custodian who said, later that night, "That kid reminded me we're not less, just not seen yet." Angela noticed the difference too. People started addressing her by name, looking her in the eye, not performatively, not as a show, just better, real. And Langford, he didn't retell the story. He didn't spin it into a funny anecdote about how a chess prodigy outsmarted me. Ha. He stayed quiet, thoughtful, asked questions in meetings he didn't used to ask. Once during a board review, he paused mid-presentation and muttered, "Don't assume you're ahead just because you moved first." Only Janice caught the reference. She smiled and said nothing. The retreat ended on a soft Sunday. The snow finally came, just a dusting. Elijah helped his mom load folded sheets into the van. Same hoodie, same slow pace, same pencil behind his ear. Nobody clapped when he left. Nobody needed to, because the real victory wasn't on the board. It was in the way the room had shifted, the way silence had become reverence, not dismissal, the way people recalculated their definitions of brilliance, of presence, of worth. The boy with the notebook didn't need applause. He had moved through their world, one square at a time, and reminded them, power doesn't have to shout. Sometimes it just plays the right move, and lets the rest unfold. If this story made you pause, even for a moment, then carry that with you. Look closer, speak softer, never underestimate quiet brilliance, especially when it comes wrapped in worn sneakers and silence. Share this story with someone who believes dignity doesn't need applause. Leave a comment if you've ever been overlooked, only to prove them all wrong. And remember, real power doesn't raise its voice. It just makes the next move. How do you move when no one's watching?